Hi guys, so today I am going to run over with you on how to bondo a bear ear. The first thing I do is I'll dry the ear off and try and get off any oil residue, any water, anything that's going to keep the bondo from adhering to my ear skin. The second step is to sew any holes. I always want to make sure that no bondo will leak out of my ear. I always try and get away with the smallest thread that I possibly can when I'm sewing my ear. The main thing is just that you do a good job so that you don't see your thread. The thread I'm going to use today it's actually just a nylon thread. It's actually, I believe, for like doing upholstery. It's actually 100% nylon. Basically, that's what it looks like. You can use any kind of thread. I don't like regular sewing thread because it frays and binds when you're stitching. And when I'm doing my ears, I like to do a whip stitch. I'll just put a little knot in the end of my thread. If I'm going to use a pretty small needle, so the hole I make won't be too large for that knot. So that way my knot won't slip through. Try not to capture any hairs when you're making your whip stitch. I personally don't like a baseball stitch when I'm doing this. And the reason is when you do a baseball stitch, it tends to trap hair, and also it tends to make your hair do this weird fold thing, and so you'll have hair sticking out either side. When you're doing a baseball stitch, it pulls the seams together like so, and so your hair will stand up like this, and especially on an ear, that's important. At least on the edge of the ear. I just don't really care for a baseball stitch, period. Sometimes you gotta work your needle around so the hair doesn't get trapped. So this particular hole in the ear was actually a spot where the bear had damaged his ear previously, and when it healed back, it created a little bit of a weird kind of a forked spot. So I went ahead and just, instead of trying to turn it, I went ahead and just split it. That way when I sew it back together, it'll look more symmetrical, less jagged. Sometimes like on mule deer, they'll have like a huge split, and sometimes the customer wants that split to be shown for character reasons, I guess. Either way, as long as there's nothing missing, and the customer doesn't want it fixed, I'll go ahead and split it and fix it. I think the ear will look better. Like I said, a lot of times you can't do that if it's a big split and there's actually sections missing. So this is the first ear. Looks pretty good. So here's the second ear. I'm gonna dry it off, and you can see this is actually a better example. You can see how it looks almost triangle shaped, and that is because originally it was like this. This piece stuck out and then came together like so. So now when you can come to a spot like this, I should say when you come to a split in the ear like so, go ahead and actually cut it into a football shape like you would if on a bullet hole. A split in this second ear that's kind of a funky hole, and what I'm going to do is treat it as like it was a bullet hole, and I'm actually going to create a triangle or a football shape, and that way when I sew it together I don't have a goofy looking section. A lot of guys wouldn't do this because they would feel like the edge of the ear would disappear, and then you would have a weird section with no hair. But on a lot of times on these bears, and this is actually going to be on the back of the rug, so you're probably not going to see it anyways due to the ears being laid back. But I feel like it's better to have a nice solid looking ear rather than having some kind of a weird fold when the stitch comes together. Once again, I'm just doing a whip stitch. It's pretty simple. Just make sure no hair is trapped in there. And I'll do probably four stitches. Sometimes when I like the first set of stitches, I will only do 3. That way I don't have to worry about a ton of tension when I tighten it and have my knot slip through the skin. And then after the knots are tight after that, you can go ahead and do 4. Make sure you have a sharp needle. The other thing I want to do is not use any needle with a cutting edge. And the reason is for that is if you have a needle with a cutting edge, you're basically going to make a section that is going to want to rip. You can see I have one stitch here that's kind of loose, so I'm just going to put some slight tension on it until it sucks in. Get that hair tucked in. And if you're worried about your stitches ripping out, you can take a little bit bigger bite with your needle, as long as you're not trapping hair in it. And that make sure your needle comes out to the edge. So now what I'm going to do for my tie off is I'm going to pull my stitches tight, and all I'm doing is winding the end of my thread around the last loop of my stitch and just pulling it tight. And you can leave a little bit of a tag line out, it's not going to make a difference. So now the next step is to figure out what ear you're working with. And so this is actually the bear's right ear. And then I'm just going to take my skin and start pushing it into the ear. So basically I'm reverting it back to right side out. But I'm going to stop and I'm just going to create a little pocket there. Hopefully you can see that. Now my bondo mixture is, I got some bondo, and I put some fiberglass fibers in there, and then a little bit of fiberglass resin. I'm just going to mix that up well. The fiberglass resin is just a pinch of it. When you're doing a bear ear, you really don't need much bondo. If you do too much bondo, essentially you're going to end up with something very lumpy. And it's going to be really hard to smooth it out and make it look good. And because we're doing the right ear, I'm going to use these forms. I'm going to find my right ear. Okay, so this edge here, the smaller lip, is going to be the top side of my ear, or the inside. So this is the bottom side, and you can actually just hold them up if you're confused, like it's a head, and find out which is the right and which is the left. So this is going to be my right ear. I'm just going to get that ready. When I'm doing my hardener, I like my ears to harden faster rather than slow, because I don't really like messing with it a lot and having to sit there and wait on it. So I'm going to do about that much. I will say that depending on the weather, it's going to either kick slow or fast. So today, lately, we've had really hot, dry weather, so I don't have to put quite as much in order for this to harden fast. I'm going to make sure that I mix the hardener in well, but also I want to make sure that those fiber strands are getting pulled apart, and so that I'm ending up with a nice mat. And would just say that when you put your first dollop of bondo in your ear, just make sure that you don't end up putting a big old blob into the tip of the ear. I also like to kind of spread it around in there. Make sure that I'm getting it kind of pressed into the skin. Then I'll reach underneath. I'll grab the tip of my ear and pull it mostly all the way out. And then what I'll do is I'll start pulling my ear back and excuse me, and I'll press some more in, making sure that I'm getting it all the way into any creases that were made or any folds. And then I'll come back up here where the edge of the ear is, where I call it like the valley of the ear here, and I'll make sure that I'm pressing and smoothing it out there, especially right here. And I ended up with just the right amount of bondo. Okay, so now what we're going to do is take my ear and just pull it all the way out, and I'm just going to start squeezing the ear till I get a fairly consistent amount. And I want to make sure that I'm getting as much of the air out as I can, and that I got enough into here where basically where the two sides meet at the bottom of the ear. Then I'm going to take my right ear form and I'm just going to kind of push it in there. Okay, and then I'm just going to fold the ear in. Now you gotta be careful that you don't end up with rubbing these ears too much. Some hair is going to fall out, but if you are really rubbing it, you can pull more hair out than you want. Usually you're fine. I've only had one ear ever on a bare slip, and that wasn't really because of me pulling on it. It was more because the bear was actually set out in the mountains too long before the guy got it to me. Now I'm going to take a tongue suppressor, and I'm just going to, kind of hard to do this with while I'm videoing, but I'm just going to take and just kind of spread. If you use your fingers, sometimes you'll end up with indents of where your finger stuck. So I like to use a flat surface like a tongue suppressor or like a wallpaper roller of some sort. After I got a pretty good shape, I'll take my brush. This is a curry comb. I found this curry comb at a garage sale, and it's a fairly old comb, but man, it is really nice. It's sturdy. I usually go through at least 3 curry combs a year, maybe more. Usually the handle breaks off or all the teeth pull out. But this thing is awesome. I think I paid 50 cents for it. And it's actually small enough I can get in between the ear and the horns on a deer to brush the hair. Very nice. So my bondo is already kicked and hard. That took about, I don't know, about 5 minutes or less. And we'll blow this out eventually. So once my ear is completely hard, I'll pull my form deal out, and I'll flip it over, and I'll just start combing the inside of the ear. I've washed these ears when I tanned it, and there's still wax buildup in this ear, and I use soap and Dawn dish soap and another degreaser, and I still have a pretty good buildup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some lacquer thinner, and I'm going to squirt it inside this ear here. I'm going to rub it around. I should be using gloves. Just going to rub it around, and what that's going to do is it's going to dissolve any earwax. I'm going to take my towel and soak any excess up. And you can see the amount of earwax that came out of that. Pretty gross. The other thing I like about using some lacquer, besides cleaning it, it actually will make most of the water evaporate, and it'll make your ear nice and fluffy. Now I'm just going to take my brush and comb my hair outward. Make sure I didn't miss any wax. And you can see it's still wet, but it looks a lot better. Much better. So that's how I bondo a bear ear.